The dog would not stop screaming. That was the only word for it. Not barking, not whining, but screaming high and raw, as 4 veterinary techs tried to pin 80 pounds of trembling German Shepherd to a steel table. His back leg hung wrong, blood soaking through the bandage a stranger had wrapped an hour ago in a gas station parking lot. His eyes were wide and white-rimmed, rolling toward the door every few seconds like he was waiting for someone who wasn't coming. "He's going into shock," the lead vet said, sweat cutting a line down his temple. "I need him still for 30 seconds, that's all I need." The dog twisted, snapped at the air, and a tech's forearm caught the edge of his teeth. She cried out and stumbled back, and for a moment the room froze in that particular kind of chaos where everyone is doing something and nothing is working. At the swinging doors, a Navy commander in a rumpled service uniform stood with his hand pressed flat against the wall, watching. His daughter had been the one to find the dog on the highway shoulder 3 hours ago, and he had not left since. He had watched grown men fail to calm this animal for 40 minutes. Then the door at the far end of the hallway opened, and a woman in a stained diner apron stepped through it, still holding a coffee pot in one hand like she'd walked straight out of her shift without thinking to put it down. She looked at the dog. The dog looked at her, and every person in that room would later swear the animal went still before she said a single word. The commander straightened off the wall. He knew that face. He didn't know from where, but he knew it. "Before we begin, where are you watching from tonight? Type your city below. I'd love to see how far this story travels. And if you believe the quietest people in a room are often the ones who've carried the most, consider subscribing. This channel is built for you." 6 weeks earlier, Dee Ferris had learned exactly how to disappear inside a job. She worked the 6 to 2 shift at the Bluebell Diner off Route 9, the kind of place with a bell over the door that had lost half its ring years ago and a coffee machine that groaned like it resented every pot it made. She wore her hair in a low braid, kept her nails short and unpainted, and never wore jewelry except for a thin silver chain tucked under her collar that nobody at the diner had ever seen. She was good at her job in a way that didn't call attention to itself. She remembered regulars' orders without writing them down. She knew which booth the trucker with the bad knee preferred, and which one to steer the young mother with the colicky baby toward, the one furthest from the kitchen noise. She moved through the dining room like water finds a low place, efficient, unhurried, never in anyone's way. At 6005 every morning, she started the first pot of coffee. At 7000, the breakfast rush hit, and she didn't stop moving for 2 hours. At 9030, there was a lull, and she'd step out back by the dumpsters for 4 minutes, no more, and lean against the brick with her eyes closed. Nobody at the Bluebell knew where Dee had come from. She'd shown up 18 months ago with a duffel bag and a work history that started blank 3 years back, and the owner, a heavy-set man named Walt who had learned a long time ago not to ask people questions they didn't offer to answer, had hired her on the spot because something in the way she carried herself told him she wouldn't be trouble. He was right. She wasn't trouble. She was quiet. But before that shift on a gray Tuesday ended, the secret Dee Ferris had guarded for 3 years would walk, or rather would be carried, bleeding, into a room full of people who had no idea who they were looking at. Here is what none of them knew. 3 years before she ever tied on a Bluebell apron, Dee Ferris had been Petty Officer First Class Diana Ferris, a Navy corpsman attached to a Marine forward surgical team, and before that, cross-trained and quietly recommended into a small joint program that handled combat search and rescue support. The kind of assignment that doesn't show up cleanly on paper. The kind where you learn to keep a person breathing in a moving vehicle, with your hands and your voice and nothing else. She had also, for 2 of those years, worked alongside military working dog teams. It had started almost by accident. A handler down, a dog panicking during an evacuation, and Dee the only one close enough and calm enough to get a muzzle off and a leash on without losing a finger. After that, word travels. She'd spent hours learning handler commands, learning the particular economy of language and touch that lets a 200-pound animal trust a stranger with its life. She learned that dogs in extremis don't respond to volume. They respond to certainty. She had been good at that work, better than good. There is a specific stillness some people carry that animals recognize before humans do, and Dee had always had it, even as a kid growing up on her grandfather's farm in Kentucky, gentling spooked horses before she was old enough to drive. Then came the convoy outside a checkpoint whose name she had spent 3 years trying not to say out loud, even in her own head. An IED. A Humvee on its side. 2 Marines she couldn't save no matter what she did with her hands, and a working dog named Samson who took shrapnel in the same blast, and who she carried, alone, 400 meters under fire, because his handler was already gone and somebody had to. She had saved the dog. She had not saved the men. She came home with a medal she never picked up and a diagnosis she never filled the prescription for. She tried, for a year, to keep serving. Then one morning she woke up and could not make herself put the uniform on, and she understood, with a kind of grief that had no edges, that the version of her that could do this work was gone, burned out somewhere on that road, and what was left needed somewhere small and slow to live. So she chose small. She chose a diner with a broken bell and a job where the worst thing that could go wrong was a burnt pot of coffee. She chose to never say the word Corman out loud again if she could help it, not because she was ashamed, because she was tired, in the marrow-deep way that doesn't heal with rest, and she had decided that the kindest thing she could do for herself was to stop being needed by anyone who might not come back. Nobody at the Bluebell knew any of it. That was the entire point. The trigger arrived at 14 that afternoon, 20 minutes before Dee's shift ended, in the shape of a black SUV that pulled up too fast and parked crooked across 2 spaces. A man in a Navy commander's uniform came through the door first, moving like someone who'd forgotten how doors worked, holding it for a teenage girl who came in right behind him cradling, really, an enormous German shepherd wrapped in what used to be a beach towel, now dark red down one side. "Somebody call a vet, please, he's bleeding bad," the girl was saying, voice cracking on every word, and Walt was already up from behind the register, already reaching for the phone. Dee had been wiping down the counter. She did not drop the rag. She did not gasp, but something in her spine went very straight, very fast, the way it used to when a radio call came in. She set the rag down. She did not hurry at first. "Bring him to the back booth," she said, and her voice came out low and even, the voice she hadn't used in 3 years, and something about it made the commander's head turn toward her sharply, like he'd heard a sound he wasn't expecting in this particular room. The girl laid the dog across the vinyl seat. He was a big animal, clearly older, gray coming in heavy around his muzzle, and even in his pain there was a discipline to him, a way he kept trying to hold still that Dee recognized instantly. This was not a stray. This was a working dog, or had been one. She crouched beside him without touching him yet, letting him see her hands, letting him smell her before she made contact, and she noted. The way she used to note things, fast and automatic, filed without thinking. The old scar tissue along his shoulder, the government-issue microchip scar behind his ear, the way his back leg was bent at an angle that meant a fracture, not just a laceration. "How long ago?" she said. Not a question, really. A request for data. 20 minutes, maybe 25, the commander said. "He got loose from my daughter at the rest stop off the highway, ran into the road, a truck clipped him. We didn't know where the closest vet was. We saw your diner had a sign for the animal clinic 2 blocks up. There's a clinic 2 blocks up? Vance Animal Hospital. I called ahead. They're waiting." Dee nodded once. She looked at the dog's eyes, glassy but tracking, and at his gums when she gently, carefully lifted his lip, pale, too pale, and something in her chest tightened at what that meant. "He's in shock," she said quietly. "We don't have time to carry him gently." "We need to move now." The commander stared at her. "You, a vet tech or something?" Dee didn't answer that. She was already moving. To Gast. The 2 blocks to Vance Animal Hospital happened in a blur that the commander would later describe, when he told this story, as the strangest 4 minutes of his life. A waitress in a stained apron directing him to lay the dog flat in the back of the SUV, a specific way, positioning his own daughter's hands on the wound, with instructions so precise and so calm that the girl, who had been sobbing, stopped crying almost entirely just from the steadiness in the woman's voice. At the clinic, it got worse before anyone could make it better. The staff took one look at the dog's condition and moved into the kind of controlled scramble that happens when an animal is circling shock. IV line, oxygen, someone paging the on-call surgeon who was 20 minutes out. But the dog, half out of his mind with pain and fear, would not let anyone near his leg. Every time a tech reached for the injured limb, he thrashed, jaws snapping, a sound coming out of him that didn't belong to a domestic animal at all. "He's going to hurt himself worse," the lead vet snapped, sweat on his brow. "I need him still for 30 seconds, that's all I need to get this line placed." A tech's arm caught his teeth at the wrist. She cried out and stumbled back, cradling it, and in the 10 seconds of stunned silence that followed, nobody was any closer to helping him. That was the room the commander stood outside of, hand flat against the wall, when the door at the far end opened and Dee walked through it, still in her apron, because she had not stopped to take it off. She had not been asked to come in. She had simply followed, the way she used to follow a call for a corpsman, without waiting for permission. She looked at the dog. Chaos, panic, 4 strangers in scrubs smelling like fear and antiseptic and adrenaline, exactly the environment that turns a frightened animal feral. And she did something none of them expected. She got down on the floor. Not crouched. Down one knee and then both, lowering herself below the dog's eye level, making herself smaller, slower, unthreatening, and she began to speak. Not to the room, not explaining herself to the vet or the techs or the man in uniform behind her, but to the dog, low and even, words that didn't sound like comfort exactly. They sounded like commands. "Boy dois," she said. "Sit." In a language and cadence none of the civilians in that room recognized, but that landed on the animal like a hand closing gently around something falling. The dog's ears, pinned flat against his skull, came up. "Blee Jeff," she said next. "Stay." And his frantic thrashing slowed, not stopped, but slowed, his chest heaving but his legs no longer fighting the hands that held him. The lead vet had gone still, watching. "What did you just—" "He's trained on Dutch commands," Dee said quietly, not looking up. "Military dogs usually are. English words sound like noise to him right now. This doesn't." She reached out, slow as syrup, and laid her palm flat against the side of his skull, right between his ears, and held it there without moving. The dog's screaming stopped. It did not happen instantly, and it was not silence exactly. His breath still came ragged. His body still trembled under the vet's hands as they finally got the IV line placed. But the fight had gone out of him. He turned his head, just slightly, toward the hand on his skull, and something in his posture changed from an animal defending itself to an animal being held. The commander, still in the doorway, had not said a word in over a minute. He was staring at Dee's hand on the dog's head, staring at the calm, mechanical precision with which she'd assessed the wound before the vet even got to it. Pressure points, airway, the particular way she'd checked his gums for capillary refill like she'd done it 1,000 times. He knew that motion. He'd watched Navy corpsmen do exactly that motion in exactly that order. "Ma'am," he said slowly. "What did you do before you waited tables?" Dee didn't answer. She kept her hand where it was, her eyes on the dog, and said only, "He's stable enough for the leg now. Somebody get me a muzzle, not to hurt him, just so he doesn't hurt himself while they set the fracture. He'll let me put it on." She was right. He did. If you believe the quietest person in the room is sometimes the one holding the whole thing together, type "never judge" in the comments below. I read everyone. They took him back for the fracture repair. Dee did not go with him. That wasn't her place, she told herself. And besides, her shift had ended 40 minutes ago, and Walt would be wondering where she'd gone. But she didn't leave. She sat in the clinic's small waiting room, apron still on, hands folded in her lap in a stillness that looked like calm and was, underneath, something closer to exhaustion. The commander sat 2 chairs down, his daughter curled against his side, both of them silent, both of them watching this stranger who had just walked into their worst afternoon and made it survivable. It was the daughter who spoke first. "That's my dad's dog," she said quietly. Well, he's my dad's late friend's dog, Sarge. He's 14. He's not even supposed to be running around like that. He's mostly retired. He got spooked by the truck horn and bolted before I could grab his leash. Dee looked at the girl properly for the first time. 16, maybe 17, red-eyed, hands still faintly stained with the dog's blood. You did everything right, Dee said. You kept pressure on the wound. That's what mattered. The girl's face crumpled slightly, not with fear now, but with something like relief at being told that. The commander put a hand on her shoulder and let her lean into him. Then he looked at Dee. I have to ask, he said, the commands. The way you assessed him. That wasn't guesswork. Where'd you learn that? Dee's jaw tightened, just barely. She looked at the clock on the wall instead of at him. A long time ago, she said. Different life. You said his gums, capillary refill, before the vet even had gloves on. You knew exactly where to check his airway. That's not something you pick up from owning a dog. I used to work with animals, she said, which was true, and which was also the smallest possible piece of a much larger truth, offered like a coin dropped into a jar to make a sound without giving away the rest. The commander studied her face for a long moment. He did not push. Something in her posture told him, the way it had told Walt 18 months ago, that this was a door she would open on her own time or not at all. My name's Commander Alan Reyes, he said instead, extending a hand. She hesitated, just a fraction of a second, the old instinct to keep her name to herself, and then shook it. Dee. Just Dee. Just Dee, she agreed, and something in the flatness of her tone told him not to ask for more. Sarge came out of surgery 2 hours later, leg pinned and splinted, groggy but stable, and the vet, a woman named Dr. Okafor who had taken over once she arrived, cutting through the earlier chaos like a blade, came out to the waiting room with an expression that was equal parts relief and confusion. He's going to be fine, she said. Clean break, good repair, he's young enough at heart to bounce back even at his age. But I have to say, she looked at Dee, whatever you did in there before I arrived probably kept him from going into full arrest. His pressure was crashing. Where did you train? Dee stood up, smoothing her apron down out of pure habit. I should get back to the diner. I'm sure Walt's wondering. Dee, Commander Reyes said, standing too. At least let me get your number. I'd like to. Sarge's owner, his real owner, isn't going to believe this when I tell him. I thought he was your dog, Dee said, and something in the way she said it made both Reyes and his daughter go quiet in a different register than before. Reyes exchanged a glance with his daughter, and when he spoke again his voice had dropped, gone careful, in the way people speak when they're about to say a name that costs them something. He was my daughter's godfather's dog, he said, Master Chief Tom Hale. He was my closest friend in the teams for 11 years. He and Sarge did 3 deployments together as an operator and dog pair before Sarge got too old to work. Tom was killed 18 months ago. Training accident stateside, which is almost worse somehow, surviving all that and then. He stopped himself, cleared his throat. His widow couldn't keep Sarge. Too painful, she said, seeing him every day and not Tom. So I took him in. My daughter loves him like he's family, because he is. The word widow landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Dee had gone very still. What was his handler's call sign, she asked, quiet, careful, the question of someone testing a memory they were afraid to trust. Reyes blinked. Hale went by, preacher. Why? Dee closed her eyes. For 3 years she had not said Tom Hale's name out loud. She had not needed to, because in every version of the story she told herself in the dark, in every version where she carried a dog 400 meters under fire and could not save the 2 men beside him, one of those men had a name she had spent 3 years trying to bury under a diner apron and a coffee pot and a life small enough to survive in. I know that dog, she said finally, opening her eyes. I know exactly who trained him. What do you mean you know him? Reyes said, and his voice had changed now, gone sharp. The voice of a man sensing that the ground under an ordinary afternoon had just cracked open. Sarge worked with a handler team overseas. If you knew him, if you knew Tom. I didn't know Tom the way you're thinking, Dee said. Her hands, folded in her lap a moment ago, were now pressed flat against her thighs, like she needed something solid to hold on to. I knew Sarge. The day he got hurt. Reyes's daughter had gone white. Wait, you were there? The day I was the corpsman on that convoy, Dee said, and the word corpsman came out of her rusty and strange, a language she hadn't spoken in years. I pulled Sarge out. I carried him 400 meters to the casualty collection point because his handler couldn't, because his handler was already. She stopped. Started again, steadier. Master Chief Hale did not die in that blast. I need you to know that. He was alive when I reached him. He asked me to get his dog to safety first because Sarge was still moving and he knew what that meant about his own chances. He made me promise. The room had gone completely silent. I got Sarge out, Dee continued, and her voice for the first time all day was not steady. And then I went back for the men, both of them. I did everything I knew how to do. It wasn't enough. Master Chief Hale died 9 minutes after I promised him I'd save his dog. Reyes had sat back down without seeming to notice he was doing it, his hand gripping the arm of the chair hard enough to whiten his knuckles. "You've had that with you for 3 years," he said slowly. "And when Sarge came through that door bleeding, you recognized him." "I recognized the scar on his shoulder," Dee said. "Same shrapnel wound. Same dog. I've thought about him every single day since. I never knew what happened to him after the medevac. I never let myself ask. I didn't think I had the right to know after I couldn't save Tom." "You saved his dog," Reyes said, and something in his own voice cracked now. "Do you understand what that meant to him?" Tom talked about Sarge like he was his own kid. "If you hadn't gotten him out." "I know," Dee said quietly. "I've told myself that 100 times. It didn't stop the guilt." Reyes was quiet for a long moment, staring at this woman in a diner apron who had just, without meaning to, without planning it, cracked open a grief he had carried folded up and put away for 18 months. "Tom's widow," he said finally. "Her name is Renee. She still lives 40 minutes from here. She's never known the full story of that day. The official report was thin, redacted, the kind of paperwork that gives you a date and a location and nothing that helps you actually understand what happened to the person you loved. She's asked me 100 times if I knew more. I never did." Dee's throat worked. "I couldn't have told her before today. I wasn't ready to say his name out loud, let alone tell his wife how he died." "Are you ready now?" Dee looked past him, out through the clinic's front window, to where the light was starting to go gold and low over the parking lot, and she thought about 3 years of small mornings and coffee pots, and a life built deliberately too small to hurt anyone, including herself. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I think Sarge finding me today wasn't an accident. I think some things find their way back around whether you're ready or not." They did not go to Renee Hale that day. Dee needed time, and Reyes, to his credit, did not push. He simply asked for her number this time, and she gave it, because something about the day had loosened whatever knot had kept her name and her past locked away for a year and a half. 3 days later, on a Friday evening after her shift, Dee found herself standing on the front porch of a small blue house, 40 minutes from the diner, Commander Reyes beside her for support. A folded photograph of Tom Hale from his Navy file in her jacket pocket, that she had not looked at in 3 years and had made herself look at twice that morning. Renee Hale opened the door wearing an apron not unlike Dee's own, flour on her hands from something in the oven, and when Reyes introduced Dee as someone who was with Tom, at the end, her face did something Dee had seen before, on the faces of every family she'd ever had to speak to after a loss. A kind of bracing, an old wound preparing itself to be touched again. "Come in," Renee said, wiping her hands on the apron. "Please." They sat in a small kitchen that smelled like cornbread, and Dee, hands wrapped around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking, told Renee Hale the truth for the first time in 3 years. Not the redacted version, not the sanitized version from an official report, but the real one. The convoy. The blast. The way Tom had refused to let her tend to him first, had grabbed her sleeve with the last of his strength and said, "Get the dog, please, get Sarge." And how she had done exactly that, and how she had gone back, and how it had not been enough, and how she had carried that not enough for 3 years like a stone sewn into her chest. Renee cried. Of course, she cried. But partway through, she reached across the table and took Dee's hand, and said the thing Dee had never once let herself imagine hearing. You gave him 9 more minutes with someone who cared about what he needed most, Renee said. He didn't die alone, scared, wondering what happened to his dog. He died knowing Sarge was safe. Because of you. Do you understand what a gift that is? Some families never get that. Dee did not know how to hold that sentence. It did not erase 3 years of guilt. But it was the first crack of light through something that had been sealed shut a long time. I have something for you, Renee said, and disappeared into the next room, returning with a small worn patch. Navy, faded, the edges frayed. Tom's old unit patch, one of the few personal items that had come home with his effects. She pressed it into Dee's palm and closed her fingers around it. He'd want you to have this, Renee said. You finished what he asked of you. That makes you part of his story now, whether you meant to be or not. Sarge healed slowly, the way old dogs do, but he healed. Dee began visiting him at Reyes's house on her days off. Awkward at first, both of them a little shy of what they'd shared in that clinic, and then less awkward, until it became a standing thing. A Sunday afternoon walk around the block with a dog whose limp was fading week by week. Word travels in small towns the way it always does. Walt heard some version of the story from Commander Reyes, who came into the Bluebell one morning specifically to tell him, quietly over coffee, that his waitress had once carried a wounded military dog 400 meters under fire and had never once mentioned it in 18 months of pouring coffee and clearing tables. Walt didn't make a thing of it at the diner. He wasn't the type. But the next week, without a word, he moved Dee off the punishing early shift and onto a schedule that gave her Sundays off for good, and when she asked him why, all he said was, "Some people have earned a slower kind of tired." Nearly a year later, on a bright Saturday afternoon, a small gathering assembled in Renee Hale's backyard. Reyes and his daughter Walt and a few of the regulars from the Bluebell who had, by then, pieced together enough of the story to want to be there, and Renee herself, setting an extra place at the outdoor table out of a habit she'd never quite broken since Tom died, the way some people always will. Sarge lay in the shade of the porch, gray-muzzled and slower. Dee sat at the table in a clean shirt instead of an apron, the worn navy patch sewn now, permanently, onto the strap of the bag she carried everywhere. Someone had brought a camera, and in the photograph that would eventually sit framed on Renee's mantel beside one of Tom in his dress uniform, Dee is caught mid-laugh at something Reyes's daughter said, her hand resting on Sarge's head exactly the way it had rested on him that first terrible afternoon. Except this time, there was nothing to hold together. There was only a dog leaning his weight contentedly into her palm, and a woman who had finally, after 3 long years, let herself come home to the people who needed her small kindness, far more than she'd ever let herself believe. The extra place at the table stayed empty, the way it always did. But for the first time since Tom Hale died, it didn't feel like absence. It felt like a seat that had, at last, been rightfully filled by everyone gathered around it. If this story reminded you that the quietest people you meet are often carrying the heaviest, most sacred kind of love, subscribe and stay a while longer. There are more stories like this one waiting for you here.